Water. Welcome to the Water Policy and Legislation Committee and special meeting of the Board of Directors for West Basin Municipal Water District, June 17, 2024. I will call this committee meeting to order. Mr. General Manager, we do have a quorum.
Director Don Deere. Here. Chairwoman Gloria Gray.
Here.
Director Scott Houston. Here. Director Harold Williams. Director Desi Alvarez. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Item 3 is public comment. Mr. General Manager, do we have anyone who wishes to speak from the public?
Madam Chair, we have not received any requests for public comment, though this meeting is being held both in person and virtually. If there's any member of the public that would like to speak, please indicate so by raising your virtual hand. And Madam Chair, I do not see any requests for public comment.
Thank you. Are there any presentations?
Staff has no presentations today.
All right, item 5, action calendar. General Manager, would you introduce item A, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, this item 5A is to approve the 2024 annual water supply and demand assessment. For this presentation, we have a new staff member, Augustine Hahn, our Water Policy and Resources Development Analyst, as well as Spencer Waterman, a representative of WSC. Go ahead.
Thank you, EJ. As EJ stated, I'm happy to represent West Basin staff here to present the annual water supply demand assessment. For the committee's reference, you can find the staff report on page 3 of the packet. And to summarize that agenda report, we'll be going over the presentation that you can find on packet page 6. So if we can get the presentation up. Thank you. Yes, so the annual water supply demand assessment overview. In 2018, the Water Conservation as a California Way of Life legislation enacted new annual water supply demand assessment requirements in California. West Basin's water shortage contingency plan specifies procedures for conducting this assessment. And urban water suppliers are required to conduct this assessment and submit an annual shortage report to DWR by July 1st of each year. The key questions posed in this assessment is, does a shortage condition exist in the following fiscal year? If so, what actions will the supplier take to address this shortage? Board and customer agency feedback helps West Basin inform their final version of the report. And moving on to the next slide, to kind of detail the coordination efforts that have taken place to get this assessment underway. On April 30th, DWR held a meeting which provided a review of the procedures and shared updates on the improvements that they've made. On May 2nd, Metropolitan hosted a coordination meeting in which they shared with us that they expect to meet all member agency imported water demands in fiscal year 25. On June 5th and 6th, West Basin submitted preliminary supply demand assessments to Metropolitan and also shared that information with customer agencies. Again, the key takeaway being West Basin is able to meet all customer agency imported water demands in fiscal year 25. At this point, I'll turn it over to Spencer Waterman, our project manager at Water Systems Consulting.
Great, thanks, Augustine, and thank you all for having me here today. I'll go into a little bit more detail about each supply source. And to start out, we looked at historical trends since fiscal year of 2018. We also compared those with projections from the Urban Water Management Plan. And lastly, we also looked at fiscal year 24-25 budget projections and ultimately decided to go with those budget projections to be aligned and in alignment. So the overall takeaway from that projection is that we expect to see about a 20% decrease from historical average for imported water and about a 5% increase for recycled water when compared to the historical average. Next slide, please. All righty, so looking at in detail at imported retail water, we expect about, like I said, a 20% reduction from the overall historical average. And that's mainly due to generally lower demands from customer agencies and customer agencies using more groundwater. Next slide, please. All right, and then for replenishment imported water, we're expecting about a 24% decrease from the historical average. And we will note that there is quite a jump in fiscal year 21-22 due to some source water quality issues with replenishment recycled water, which we'll talk about in a couple slides from now. But again, we expect a slight decrease from the historical average. Next slide, please. All right, so switching over to recycled water, we expect about a 1.4% increase from the historical average for retail recycled water. And in general, we expect a longer-term trend of increasing recycled water demand. And that's in alignment with the Urban Water Management Plan projections. Next slide, please. For replenishment recycled water, we also expect a bit of an increase, about 12% from the historic average. And in a similar fashion as the previous slide, we expect that trend to increase over the long term in alignment with the projections from the Urban Water Management Plan. Next slide, please. All right, so putting all of those supplies together, we have a comparison here of supply and demand in DWR's tables that you have to report with. And so DWR's method asks suppliers to consider what they call unconstrained demand. And so that would be demand that you would expect theoretically if you didn't have any kind of conservation in place. And so we went through DWR's method and assumed that there might be a 10% increase if you didn't have any kind of conservation in place. And that's shown in table in the top table there. And then so in the bottom table, we're showing recycled water. And if we go on to the next slide, you'll see when we compare supply and demand, we're showing a theoretical 10% shortage there. And that's only saying if there were no conservation programs in place. However, if you go down to the yellow highlighted area, you'll see that there is an expected demand reduction due to the conservation programs that are in place. Therefore, you end up with a supply meeting demand and no shortage. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, those demand reductions that we expect from the theoretical unconstrained demand, those are coming from the programs that are being implemented that are summarized in this table, which is also in DWR's format that we're required to use. There are no impacts from Metropolitan, as Augustine mentioned earlier. They expect to meet all demands, and so we're not expecting to have to do any kind of rationing or anything like that in the forthcoming fiscal year. Also, due to having some conservation programs in place, we expect that demands will not rebound and jump up to historical levels that we've seen in the past. It's kind of sustaining conservation that we're expected to see from these programs. Next slide, please. All right, so I'll turn it back over to Augustine to summarize and move forward here.
Thanks, Spencer. Yeah, just to cover some of the next steps, we are asking the committee for some feedback on this supply demand assessment. We'll continue to collect feedback from our customer agencies and also consider any needed changes to the final draft of the supply demand assessment. We are planning to bring this before the board at the June 24th meeting. And we plan on submitting this supply demand assessment to DWR by the deadline on July 1st. Just to reiterate the staff recommendation here, the recommendation is that the committee approve the district's supply demand assessment for 2024. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. Any director has comments or questions right now? Hearing none, before we ask, is it Director Deere or Director Houston who's the co-chair of the committee?
It's Director Deere.
Director Deere. Before I ask you, if we should move this forward. Mr. General Manager, is there anything we should be doing, looking at because of the decrease in the demand for our recycled water? Anything we should be doing?
Madam Chair, I think, we're seeing the success of all of our water use efficiency programs, as well as the messaging, not only in the West Basin service area, but Metropolitan Water District area. And I would say California in general. The only thing that we may want to consider, and we've discussed this in the past, is that West Basin continues to be in a water shortage level 3. Is that correct? West Basin, excuse me. Which signifies that there are water supply issues and challenges. Obviously, the state of California continues to struggle with this. We have good years and bad years. Depends on the precipitation and snowpack. But that would be the only thing that the board may want to consider is whether to change that status.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Director Deere, did you have any questions, or should we move this forward with a recommendation for approval?
I first question, by cutting back and reducing, what's that going to do to our income to run the district?
Well, excuse me.
Question.
The budget has been a challenging matter this year. Obviously, significantly lower sales does impact revenues. I'm very pleased with the direction of the board that we've really looked at adopting a very conservative budget. You may recall we're utilizing 80,000 acre feet of imported water sales as our projected sales, which obviously is a projected decline in revenue. But we've been able to produce, I think, a budget for the board's consideration that's in line with that decline in sales.
Director Gray, I move we send this on to the full board.
All right, thank you, Director Deere. We will move it with our recommendation from the committee. We will go to item 6, information.
Yes, Madam Chair. The next item that we have is our state and federal legislative updates. And for this presentation, we do have Matt Vea, Manager of Water Policy and Resources Development.
Thank you, EJ, and good afternoon, directors. I'm now on page 19 of the agenda packet. And I'll begin with the state legislative update, which begins with the Neomela Pappas monthly report on page 21 of the packet. So we're currently in the period of the legislative session where the second house committees are meeting and voting on bills. This means that bills that are still around and alive already passed through their house of origins, and they're now going through the second house. Legislators and stakeholders are working on last minute fixes and agreements on their bills prior to the July 3rd deadline for policy committees to meet and report out bills before the summer recess. The legislature will take its annual month-long summer break from July 3rd to August 5th, reconvening in time to finish out its legislative calendar and entering into the madness of election season with the general election taking place in early November. A lot of time has been spent by the legislature on the budget in recent weeks, and following of the release of the May revise on May 15th, the legislature passed just a few days ago a placeholder budget, sending it to the governor ahead of the June 15th deadline. Legislators and Governor Newsom are now, they'll now have until about July 1st to agree on a final spending package for fiscal year 24-25. And beyond the issue of the projected deficit, which reported on, it continues to change. Right now, it's estimated at about $45 billion for next year and $30 billion for the following year. Another topic of discussion that continues between the legislature and the governor's office is funding for schools and how that impacts the overall state budget. This also ties into the bond discussion that is ongoing. As for the bond, it seems to be rapidly approaching its final form, which is needed because as these negotiations continue, we're approaching the June 27th deadline for the legislature to pass a bond, which would be placed onto the November 2024 ballot. At this time, the legislature has narrowed its bond options to two topics. One is the climate and two is education. And in particular on climate, the legislature is considering 5 different proposals, 3 on the Assembly side and 2 on the Senate, that range anywhere between $6 billion to $10 billion. They'll have to finalize those numbers again in the next 10 days and come up with a final dollar amount for that climate bond, as well as what it includes. So West Basin and our Sacramento advocacy team have been prioritizing and advocating for the water-related asks within our larger coalitions such as Aqua, water reuse, and those asks have included seeking funding for water recycling and conservation, among other water needs. A large coalition of water and business interest groups are circulating a letter asking that 2/3 of any climate bond include money for water infrastructure. Based on the theoretical $10 billion bond, that would include $1 billion for recycling and desalination projects and $400 million for conservation and water use efficiency, 2 of the top kind of priorities for West Basin. We'll continue to keep you apprised, certainly reporting back next month once we have some closure on the bond issue, where they end up with it, and we'll send out a communication to the directors once that's finalized. Next, I want to talk about Assembly Constitutional Amendment 16 by Assemblymember Isaac Bryan. This proposal would enshrine in the California Constitution the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. This is something that would go on a future ballot if it were to pass the legislature. The update is that the proposal has stalled this year, so we will not be moving forward this year. There was an LA Times article, I believe last week, that was out about this issue. Assemblymember Bryan has stated there wasn't just quite enough time to iron out a number of issues on the proposal prior to the June 27th ballot deadline. One of the sticking points were amendments that clarified environmental rights couldn't be used in a way that's inconsistent with state laws or other constitutional rights. And proponents of these green amendments were concerned that this language would make environmental rights secondary to other laws, providing little enforceability in court. So as a result, not moving forward this year, but if it comes back next year, which I believe Assemblymember Bryan has stated he would like to bring it back, if that should pass next year, it would likely go to voters in the 2026 election cycle. So we're a couple years out before this would, potentially go to voters. This will give Assemblymember Bryan and others more time to work on the language that is being labeled as a quote unquote job killer by the California Chamber of Commerce. So there's proponents and opponents on both sides. Speaking of ballot measures so far, there's been 4 measures that have qualified for the November ballot, including 2 that relate to voter approval and voter thresholds. However, other measures, including the climate bond and some other tax and voter proposals, are still in limbo, and they now have the next 10 days to qualify for the ballot. Last week, the PPIC did a poll on the upcoming November election, and in particular items the legislature is closely monitoring and negotiating ahead of that deadline to place measures on the ballot are, some of the results include 34% of voters say that this is a good time, and 64% say this is a bad time to issue state bonds for state programs and infrastructure projects. The Business Roundtable initiative that's been going around that would increase the threshold to increase state and local tax limits, which is being opposed by many local government agencies and CSDA. On that question, 32% would vote yes for that type of initiative, and 63% would vote no. On Assembly Constitutional Amendment 1, which would replace the 2/3 vote requirement with a 55% majority to pass local tax and bond measures for public infrastructure and affordable housing, 45% would vote yes, and 53% would vote no. And then on the measure requiring that a 2/3 vote threshold be approved by 2/3 of voters, which would make it harder for the Business Roundtable initiative to succeed, 58% would vote yes, and 37% would vote no. This is all very confusing. I understand that it's very complex. There's a whole lot of analysis that we could dive into. However, the bottom line based on this one poll, again, it's just one, but the bottom line seems to be that voters seem a little skeptical of entering into more debt at this time, which isn't a big surprise as the very narrow margin of passage for Prop 1, which happened back in March of this year. But they do seem supportive of state and local agencies maintaining their ability to raise revenue and taxes. Moving on to water rights, which is the topic we've reported on during the last couple of years. One bill looks to move forward while another does not. AB 460 by Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Cahan has been amended in a way that has led to the removal of opposition by Aqua and other similar coalition interests. This bill would still increase penalties for water stealing scofflaws, but it would no longer expand the authority of the State Water Board to investigate and punish violations of water rights. The other bill, AB 1337 by Assemblymember Buffy Wicks, would have given the State Water Board more power over pre-1914 water rights, which are considered some of the oldest and most protected rights in California. However, it doesn't look like the author was able to present enough amendments to appease the opposition this year, and so she'll likely remove that bill from consideration for the remainder of this year. Just a few other bills of interest that I'll touch on includes AB 2079 that relates to large diameter groundwater extraction wells. This is a bill that we've been tracking for several months now, working in coalition with WRD, Metropolitan Water District, for possible impacts to pumpers in our region. And while amendments were made that softened much of the opposition to this bill, it did fail passage in Senate Natural Resources on June 11th. SB 366, which relates to California Water Plan long-term supply targets, and a bill that this board supports, will be heard in the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee this month. It had recent amendments sought by the environmental community, and so we'll continue to track this bill and remain engaged on seeking its passage. We've also been having a lot of help from Nima Lapapis on our behalf in advocating for this bill, and this bill looks to be scheduled for a June 25th hearing date. SB 1330 relating to urban retail water use is another bill we've been tracking. It was recently amended last week and will also be heard in the Water Parks and Wildlife Committee on June 25th. This bill has the potential to benefit water retailers in general. However, there's been a number of recent amendments that were still being analyzed for their impacts. And then finally, SB 1255. This is relating to public water systems and needs analysis. This bill would essentially establish a low-income rate assistance program that would be funded using voluntary contributions from ratepayers. It would provide a 20% discount on water and wastewater charges. However, it requires other ratepayers to fund the discounts. This is a bill we're tracking and we're engaged on. Staff, including myself and Augustine, have participated in multiple stakeholder meetings hosted by Metropolitan Water District, which has uncovered a lot of concerns with the bill. Aqua and others currently have an opposed unless amended position on the bill. And while well-intentioned, a number of issues remain with the bill, including potential Prop 218 issues and cost impacts on agencies who would have to implement these types of programs. As this board has a very keen interest in water affordability, we will keep you updated on this bill, and it is set to be heard in the Assembly Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials on June 25th. So more to come on that soon. For other bills that we're tracking, a full bill report put together by NPA begins on page 26 of the packet. Otherwise, that concludes my state report. But are there any questions before I move over to the federal update? All
Are
right.
there any questions? Okay, Matt, thank you. Go on.
Okay, thank you. So for federal, the Van Scoyoc Associates monthly federal report begins on packet page 37. And to start off, last week, legislation known as the Water Conservation Rebate Tax Parity Act, or HR 8682, was introduced by Representative Jared Huffman of California and John Curtis of Utah. It was also co-sponsored by two other California representatives, Doug LaMalfa and Judy Chu. This bill would revise the federal tax code to ensure that homeowners are exempt from paying income tax when they receive rebates from water utilities for their efforts to conserve water, including for turf removal rebates. Similar legislation has been introduced in the past, but has struggled to make it through Congress. The text has yet to be released, but is expected to mirror or be very similar to previous versions. If you'll recall, similar legislation passed in California a couple of years ago, and having both state and federal policies align on this would be great, especially since federal taxes are usually larger than the state side for most taxpayers. This legislation is likely to be pretty widely supported by the water industry, including Metropolitan Water District, and West Basin has also previously supported legislation like this in the past. With the board's ongoing commitment to conservation, including its various rebate programs, this seems like a great candidate for us to support, and staff plans to bring it back to this committee next month for a potential support position. The companion bill in the Senate could also be in the works, with Senator Padilla in California seeking a partner from the GOP to introduce similar legislation. A couple of weeks ago, you might have already heard this, the United States Bureau of Reclamation, and sorry, Tammy, if you're going to report on this as well, it announced its first set of funding for large-scale water recycling projects. In total, about 180 million in funding awards were made available through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and of that, 99 million was awarded to Metropolitan for its Pure Water SoCal project, with another 30 million going to LA for its groundwater replenishment project. This program is available for recycling projects with a cost of more than $500 million, and it does require a fairly large 75% cost share from the recipient. During West Basin's annual Washington, D.C. advocacy trip in April, we had the opportunity to meet with water reuse and learn about a potential investment tax credit for commercial and industrial customers. Water reuse has been working to establish an investment tax credit somewhere in the range of 30% of the cost of a project for industrial and commercial businesses that adopt water recycling technologies and systems. As envisioned by the proposal under development, a business would be eligible for the tax credit if it purchases treated recycled water through public agency, or if the business builds an on-site facility that captures, treats, and reuses water. As of now, a bill establishing an ITC has yet to be introduced in Congress, but there has been some interest from Senator Sherrod Brown, who's a Democrat from Ohio, and he is currently considering championing the measure in the Senate. West Basin remains engaged on this issue, working with water reuse and some other industry partners to explore the concept and to discuss possible pathways for the bill to take to maximize its impact in our service area. This is an issue that could benefit not only West Basin, but also our retailers and CII customers, such as our refineries. And it's definitely something that we'll continue to engage on to see if there's a workable path forward. Moving on to the Colorado River, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation recently released an updated Lake Mead 5-year outlook, which is projecting a slight improvement in conditions on Lake Mead due to back-to-back wet winters. The 5-year projections are released 3 times per year and present a range of scenarios that could trigger different allocations depending on the levels in the reservoir. There's a margin of error associated with these projections, and adding to the uncertainty is the expiration of the 2007 Colorado River interim guidelines, which occurs in 2026, with a number of new agreements and operated procedures pending. According to the recent projections, there's now a 0% chance that Lake Mead will fall below 1,000 feet before 2028. There's still a 13% chance that it will fall below 1,020 feet by 2028, which didn't change from January's projection. The Bureau's August projections ultimately determine whether the lower basin states will receive any allocation cuts in the following year. If you'll recall, the last 2 years, the states of Arizona and Nevada have received cuts, whereas the lake's been just high enough to avoid them in California so far. On other storage-related news, the Bureau of Rec announced on May 30th that it will be providing nearly $70 million for Sites Reservoir through the WIN, W-I-I-N, water storage funding made available through the bipartisan infrastructure law and annual appropriations. Sites is the Off-Stream Reservoir in Northern California, northwest of Sacramento, that's being considered as the next major water storage location in the state, surface storage. Sites would allow for additional water supply flexibility for both state and federal water contractors, including Metropolitan Water District. In other funding news, our friends from the Water Replenishment District recently received $25 million from the Bureau of Recs Water Smart Title 16 Desalination Grant Program for its Torrance Groundwater Desalter project, which is good news for them. And then, and finally, in early June, the Department of the Interior announced $700 million in additional funding through the Inflation Reduction Act for long-term water conservation in the lower Colorado River Basin. This bucket 2 funding will go toward innovative projects like water distribution structures, advanced metering infrastructure, canal lining, turf removal, groundwater banking, desalination, recycling water, and water purification. West Basin staff will be reviewing the funding program for its conservation and recycling programs, as well as other potential infrastructure opportunities. And that concludes my federal update. Additional information is available in the monthly report, compliments of BSA. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions, board members?
Yeah, this is Director Houston, Madam Chair.
Yes, Director. Yes, Director, please.
Thank you, Matt. It's a really thorough report, and obviously a lot's going on, particularly in Sacramento at this moment. DC, probably not quite so much, but I think it's kind of a combo comment / question. I mean, our area at this time does not really have any major shifts in local representation, except for the Steve Bradford senator seat, I believe. But for the most part, everyone's an incumbent. It's pretty calm in our area, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Very few changes expected this next election cycle.
Yeah, because for those who are up this cycle, it's they're incumbents. Most of them are, they're going to make it through. It's just the Bradford seat that will have a transition in our area as he's terming out. And obviously, at the federal level, the president could go or not, but state senators, United States senators, Congress people, pretty consistent, right?
Yeah, there'll be obviously the race for the second Senate seat.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, for consideration, but
Dianne Feinstein's seat. That's correct.
Correct. Yeah, so that won't be.
Yep. Okay, but all that being said, I mean, unless something changes on the federal side, we're going to be pretty stable for another 2 years, predominantly in California and in our local service area.
Yeah, especially in our service area. So, yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Matt, for the report. Can we go to the next item B, please? Quarterly safe clean water report, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. As you know, West Basin Municipal Water District does continue to serve on 2 of the watershed area steering committees. And for this quarterly safe clean water report, we do have Matt Bay, the manager of water policy.
Thank you, EJ. So directors, we're now on page 43 of the agenda packet. And this is a quarterly report for the Safe Clean Water Program. So I'll provide some updates on the program from the last few months and also share some upcoming items of interest. You may also find more information about all Safe Clean Water meetings, projects, and other details at the website safecleanwaterla.org. That website has recently gone through a very nice refresh, I might add, and it's a lot more user-friendly now. So that's a good resource to check out. I'll begin with Central Santa Monica Bay, which includes the northern parts of our service area, mostly Division 4, Director Houston, and then with a small part of Division 2. This report includes updates since my last report in February. The March meeting was canceled. However, the April meeting was the most important meeting of the year as it included a vote on the final fiscal year 24-25 stormwater investment plan recommendations for that watershed area, which would then be submitted to the Regional Oversight Committee for review. Over the past 6 to 9 months, committee members have received multiple presentations from project applicants, and this was the final opportunity to hear about and review the projects before taking a vote. Projects under consideration in the Central Santa Monica Bay include scientific studies, technical resources programs, infrastructure programs, which are kind of the big construction projects, and then project modification requests, which are previously approved infrastructure programs whose scopes or budgets have changed, and an increase in funding is being requested. This year, the following projects were submitted to the committee for review and approval. There were 3 scientific studies. One that was the best practices for maintaining stormwater dry well capacity, submitted by the Cal Poly Pomona, who submitted this project to all of the watershed area. There was a street sweeping study done by or submitted by LA Sanitation District. This was something that Director Williams had asked about, and I provided information on that last month or the month before. And then there was a pollutant source characterization study also by LA San. However, this project was ultimately removed from consideration prior to our vote. There was also one technical resources program. This was the Sky Sanctuary's San Vicente Streetscape Plaza in the city of West Hollywood. However, the application for this project was withdrawn prior to the vote. The city acquired internal funding, but they will very likely return for additional funding from the watershed steering committee at a future date. There was also one infrastructure program that was the Baldwin Vista Green Streets project by LA San. This is located very close to Director Gray's area in her division. I think it might just be outside the border or partially in it. And then there were 2 project modification requests, MacArthur Lake Rehabilitation Project and Bayona Creek TMDL project, both by LA San. Ultimately, the steering committee ended up approving all of the scientific studies, infrastructure programs, and project modification requests that weren't removed prior to the vote. These projects will now move up the decision-making process with ultimate approval by LA County Board of Directors later this year. Based on those fundings, the Central Santa Monica Bay Watershed Area Steering Committee is now funded at 86% of capacity for the next year, 77% in 25-26, and 57% in 26-27. This would mean that there's still room for new projects and or project modification requests in those out years. And then the May meeting for Central Santa Monica Bay was canceled. However, we did meet in early June, just last week, which included a presentation on the FY 24-25 Strategic Outreach and Engagement Plan, as well as a presentation on the findings of a previous scientific study. There is currently a call for projects. However, as I'll discuss in a couple of minutes, this will be a much more limited process this year for good reason. I'll now move on to the South Santa Monica Bay Committee, which includes the majority of our service area, including parts or all of divisions 1 through 5. In March and April, the committee received updates and held discussion on all of the projects under consideration for funding under the fiscal year 24-25 Stormwater Investment Plan. This included 3 scientific studies, the same exact ones that I talked about for Central Santa Monica Bay. Those were the same ones for South Santa Monica Bay. There was a different technical resources program, which was the Gardena Willows Wetlands Stormwater Enhancement Project, submitted by the City of Gardena and Friends of the Gardena Willows Wetland Preserve. 2 infrastructure programs, the Torrance or Peninsula Region Airport Stormwater Basin Project, and a Dominguez Channel Parkway VMP's prioritization project. There were also 2 project modification requests, both by LA projects, the Wilmington Neighborhood Greening Project and the Wilmington Q Street Local Urban Area Flow Management Project. Our committee was unable to come to agreement on the stormwater investment plan at the April meeting, so further discussion and a vote was postponed to a special meeting held on May 2nd. The reason for this is that the South Santa Monica Bay, unlike Central, is very oversubscribed at this point, and so discussion on whether and how to fund projects was more protracted this year. At the May 2nd special meeting, discussion was focused on voting on the SIP, and after a lot of back and forth on projects and funding levels, Our committee ultimately voted to fund both of the scientific studies, the Gardena Willows project, the Peninsula or slash Torrance project, and a project modification request for the Wilmington, one of the Wilmington projects. The Dominguez Channel project and the Wilmington Q Street project modification requests were not included in the final. Based on the inclusion of those projects, South Santa Monica Bay would now be funded at 91% next year, 95% in 25-26, and 91% in 26-27. This leaves very little room for any new projects other than minor ones in the next couple of funding cycles. Both the May 15th and the June 19th meetings were canceled, with meetings expected to resume next month in July. And before I finish on this report, I wanted to touch on one important item regarding a pause on funding new projects in round 6, which is the next kind of fiscal year funding cycle taking place for projects in 25-26. Based on the fact that many watershed areas are reaching capacity over the next few years, there will be a 1-year funding pause in 25-26 for new infrastructure programs. Again, those are the big projects. There will continue to be funding for the scientific studies and for the technical resource programs. However, those are much smaller in scope and budget, so it won't affect overall budget too much next year. The deadline for new project applications is July 31st of this year. This is definitely, I would consider, a growing pains type of situation for this program. And I expect there to be many discussions throughout all the different steering committees and higher levels at the board of directors this year regarding how this program moves forward. And as many previously funded projects continue to have cost impacts on current and future years. There could also be a re-envisioning of some aspects of this program, as we'll continue to run into this issue with the current setup of the program of funding projects, big projects that last several years, and often bringing them back for additional funding in future years. So we'll definitely report back as this discussion unfolds. With that, that concludes my Safe Clean Water update. But please let me know if you have any questions.
Madam Chair.
Any questions? Yes, please.
Sure. Thank you. This is Director Houston. Yeah, I do have a couple questions, and thank you, Matt. And I remember I'm the one that has asked us to do this, and I see that we're doing it quarterly, right? Is it quarterly? You know, what I would ask is if there's a way going forward, we could have a little more meat in the write-up, because everything you said is wonderful, but that was all oral, and it could have probably been written in here. So any one of us can look at it, and or somebody else later can look at it. So if there's a way to do that going forward, that'd be good. Because these are excellent to know, but you know, I can't write fast enough to keep up, understand. And the fact that we're part of 2 watersheds, right? So it's important. So a couple questions that I don't know the answers to. Is the funding fairly equitable amongst the watersheds across the whole county, or is it different numbers for each watershed, like R2?
Yeah, it is different numbers. It's based on, trying to remember the exact formula, but
Portion goes directly to the municipality that pays it,
right.
and then a portion goes to the regional aspect. So they're all separate.
Yeah, but for instance, I think, you know, some of them get roughly $20 million a year. Some of them might be closer to 15 million. So there's a little bit of range there, but it's not that far off between the different.
So when you're sitting in those meetings, like in one area, you all might be talking about $20 million that people are applying for. The other one might be talking about 15, right? Okay. So that was one thing I would want to understand, that, because then you're obviously talking about how a lot of them are already mostly subscribed already, right? So in the next 2 or 3 years, there's not even going to be a lot of extra money to do anything more. And then there's going to be a pause for a year.
Right. This coming year. Correct.
So, which by the way, that would be good just to put in the write-up to say, hey, you know, this year they had X dollars. Here's those breakdowns and what the names of those projects were and where they're located. And we have a vote on that, right? I mean.
Correct. Yeah, we have a vote on each of those 2 steering committees.
Okay. And I know that this program is having growing pains or what have you. And I know that there's been a number of people who are flustered with, you know, how the money is getting kicked out or not getting kicked out fast enough. I know, I'm aware, and how different communities and including, like, let's say, for example, at BizFed, our water committee a while back, you know, they did ask the county to come on and talk because, you know, people are interested, you know, in this money that's been authorized. How quick is it getting out there? So I look forward to hearing that. One or two last questions. Now, when you said the board of directors, do you mean the board of supervisors?
Yes, sorry, Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
Yes, they have the ultimate.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's what I thought. So ultimately, these committees, they make the recommendations, what have you, decisions, but then it ultimately goes to the board of supervisors who approves it, right?
Right, usually in the fall, I believe, or late summer, fall. Yeah.
I think that just coming out of all that, that's why I want to understand how much money we were talking about, how much, a lot of it's already been, you know, assigned. So really the next, sounds like 2 to 3 years, you're not even going to have a lot to really dole out as people come asking, and then there's gonna be a pause. So, you know, it's interesting on the one hand, probably a little bit frustrating for people to understand, like, okay, there's a lot of money that's coming through the system. And, you know, now there's certain projects been approved. Now there's not much to work with in the future. I don't know where they put priorities on these studies, which I heard you say some were authorized, some were not. And certain organizations come asking for studies. But when you look at studies versus actual projects, although you need a study to a project a lot of times. So, I don't know how to ask this, Matt, but I mean, I understand. So the Gardena Willows, for example, that's a study. It sounds like you all.
It's a technical resources program, so it's different than a study, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, but they're both low cost. Like you can only have, I think, up to 5% of the total budget go towards scientific studies.
Hmm.
Can't remember what it is for the TRP, but it's a lower amount. I think it's 80% plus needs to go towards the infrastructure program.
Oh, good. Okay. So it's built into the formula.
Correct.
We're not going to just fund a bunch of studies. They can only fund parts of the study.
Right.
Okay, that's good to know. And for example, like that one, that's coming, is that from the city of Gardena? Or is that?
We're one of the submitting partners, and then also the Friends of the Gardena Willows was the kind of the.
Okay. That came from them, for example, versus say that the street sweeping or the pollutant, sources, those were coming from the city of Los Angeles, or the sanitation department?
Yes, that's correct.
But that's what I was getting at, because I mean, we all know that there's the really big players that come asking, which, you know, may or may not need the resources as much as the smaller communities. And that's what I would hope people are weighing. But also if there's a formula built in that you're not just, you know, every person who wants a study gets the study completely paid for. It's formulaic.
Yeah, we do take equity into account and who's received funding in the past. We try to spread it out between, there's a new project from a different part of the service area that hasn't applied in the past, and that, you know, would likely be looked upon more favorably in the eyes of the committee. The Gardena Willows was a good example of something that was a unique type of project. It had unanimous support from the committee this year as a good project and something that would benefit, you know, a small city, small area. So that was looked upon favorably this year as well.
Then when again is the final approval of what you all have already done supposed to be?
I think it's later this summer or fall. I can't remember. I'll find out the exact date for you.
So all this to be said, actually, like when you put the new report together, and I don't know if you can do this before the board meeting agenda, but it would be good just to have that in there. And then going forward, so that way any of us who looks at this sight unseen could see what happened, the names of the projects, kind of where they're located. I'm not trying to say do a lot of extra work, but we need a synopsis. That was the goal of all of this. So we see how much funding was available, you know, all those projects, you know, what's now prescribed, et cetera. You're gonna have the moratorium, because everything you said was great. But I think it's good for us to have this. And then in the end, I know a lot of it's not in our wheelhouse, but of course, the other thing here is to understand what projects do get approved in our communities. So where will West Basin potentially at least talk about it and or you know, are we in any way, shape or form, just helping to amplify the message a little bit in some of our communications to say, you know, X, Y, and Z projects this year were approved, you know, right? Because, and I know EJ, a lot of these are not the things within our jurisdiction, but they are in our communities. And people, let's be real, they don't know that this is happening. Unless their local city or someone says it, I don't think anybody gets the message. So that's something maybe to come back with to us or our communication side, but how do we add that to what we're saying is going on in this set of communities we represent? Yeah.
Do that. We are looking at more opportunities to work with Gilda Bay and our school districts to, you know, to really get out that these types of programs are available, although there's a pause coming this next year, but we'd like to see more projects in our service area. So working together with some of our.
I do. So, and thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just end with this. So I do ask that be a future item at some point, EJ, in our discussions or, you know, strategic planning, what have you, on the communication side, how can we incorporate the knowledge and the things we're involved with? Because we do have a vote now, right? So to let people know that these things got approved in their cities and stuff. And, or, I mean, I don't even know how the county talks about, I really don't, because I don't hear any of it, right? I don't hear, you know, our local supervisors or anybody else saying, in my communities, these things happen. And maybe they'll do that at the end of the year. I don't know, but let's figure out how can we at least let people know in our universe about this?
Why don't we, we'll work with the county to identify kind of their strategy as far as doing that. Probably because I've been involved, I have seen a great deal of outreach as far as the programs and projects that they funded. Because it was a bond or a ballot measure, they've continued to, I think, showcase the successes of some of the funding. And so we'll work with the county to kind of provide an overview of what they're doing to communicate that. But as with anything, I think we can always do a better job amplifying that message and getting it out to the communities.
Yeah. One last thing on that, because I mean, it's through the Public Works Department, right? County Public Works. So maybe at a future, when we talk about this, you guys can find out, well, how are they, if they're even doing it? Again, I don't know. But how are they doing it, or how are they proposing to do it? Because last but not least, I mean, these are local, all of us, taxpayer dollars. Everyone would expect they know things have been happening. You know, and the county, it's on them obviously to communicate that. Where's this money going? And so if the average person doesn't see or hear about it, only us insiders, well, then obviously I think people can do a better job. But then that goes back to, I'm not rather to say they're terrible. It's to say, well, how can we all help? Or maybe they do have a plan, or maybe there's just something right now we're missing. But I think that would be really good, because I think our residents would like to know these things, you know? So let's, I don't know when you want to bring that back, EJ, but whether it's in this committee or communications, but can you bring us something just to give us more information and
Yes,
we can start talking about some guidance for staff?
happy to do that. What we'll do is we'll take Matt's talking points, because I do think that they provided a great overview. We'll wrap that up. It'll be included in the board packet on Monday.
Sure.
And so you'll have a chance to kind of review that, but then we'll also work with the county and really kind of hone in on what they're doing as far as outreach, and then see what exactly we could do to assist.
Maybe let's do this. Maybe within 1 to 2 months, it could be, I don't know if it's in this committee or if it goes to the communications committee, but one or the other, right? EJ,
Correct.
when do you think we should put it in?
I think keeping it here as far as this discussion and an overview of the program, if we want to get into, you know, depending on what we're going to do to communicate that in outreach, then maybe it trickles over into the, public information education. But because of the topical matter, let's keep it here for now.
Sounds good to me. Okay, great.
The timing on that is good, because there's actually a strategic outreach and engagement plan, the report that gets done each year, and we're set to look at that next month. So I can share that with the
That would be great. Okay, good. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, can we move to the next item? I think it's MWD report.
Yes, Madam Chair, as you mentioned, this is our monthly Metropolitan Water District update. And for this presentation, we have Tammy Hurley-High, our Water Policy and Resources Analyst.
Afternoon, Chair Gray and Member Deere and Director Houston. So this report is intended to brief the board on activities and issues at the Metropolitan Water District that are relevant to West Basin and its customer agency. And this begins on page 45 of the committee packet. First item is the Climate Adaptation Master Plan for Water. The board has taken, or they've done the progress report. They approved year one report last month. It includes a very comprehensive overview of the climate risk to water supply, their infrastructure, their operations, their workforce, and financial sustainability. This was, a year-long effort, so it's a really good report that has come out. It also maps out the work to be done throughout the remainder of 2024 and beyond. And that would include the framework for climate decision-making and reporting, the policies and initiatives, the business modeling, and the funding strategies. So Metropolitan Subcommittee on Long-Term Regional Planning Processes and Business Modeling involves a task force that is comprised of the subcommittee board members and a selection of member agency managers. They have convened each month to prepare this plan. The Climate Adaptation Master Plan for Water is referred to as CAMP for Water in its acronym. So the CAMP Water Task Force will continue discussion, and included in this report to you today is a schedule of what topics will be reviewed in the coming months. And also included is a link to a copy of that year one progress report. So the next item is the business model refinement. So coming out of the Camp for Water Master Plan, it is intended to provide a roadmap to guide Metropolitan future capital investments and the business model for their organization. So last month, the information was provided to the members of the subcommittee on long-term regional planning processes and business modeling that included Metropolitan's history, their accomplishments, and current programs that include their revenue, their conservation, and local resource program models. So the purpose of the Metropolitan Business Model refinement will address several areas that would include overall uncertainty for water supplies and demand, the changing regulation, the technology advancements, and much more. Refinement on the business model will have an established schedule for ongoing integration with Metropolitan's 10-year financial forecast, along with a risk analysis that will be incorporated into the board's investment and decision-making. Upon approval of an updated business model, that implementation would begin during next calendar year, 2025. Next item on this report is the results of focus groups on water issues and public trust. So during 2023, EMC Research worked with Metropolitan to conduct a survey and focus groups for Metropolitan to gather input from community members on their overall trust in water agencies. Last month, EMC Research provided an update on the findings related to water supply and water quality, along with their recommendations. So also included in this report is a link to a copy of those presentation slides. This was a qualitative research project which was designed to gather feedback from Southern California residents on overall trust in agencies and institutions generally, and in organizations like Metropolitan. Their report included key findings on trust in public agencies, trust in water quality, perceptions of Metropolitan, knowledge of water supplies, awareness of water quality, and preferences for bottled water. So moving on, regarding board meeting actions included in this report Under attachments A through C are the board, are a list of items that the board acted upon last month. The board member vote results for May, and then a list of items for the meeting in June. So another item of note, of which you may have already heard, is that last week Metropolitan held their meetings, and on Wednesday they held a special board meeting for a closed session item on a discussion of alleged employment violations. And reporting out of closed session, the board placed the general manager on administrative leave. And immediately following that meeting, Metropolitan issued a news release stating that the general manager was placed on paid administrative leave for up to 90 days. And then they appointed Devin Apatahe as the interim general manager. At the board meeting, Board Chair Ortega said that he wants to reassure Metropolitan staff and the public that Metropolitan Board is determined to act with strong unity and swiftness to protect everybody. They've made some very difficult decisions, but maintain their commitment to the policies and directions of their organization. And then last Saturday, Board Chair Ortega issued a media statement that this decision was made to allow time to investigate various personnel matters that are not exclusively based on any issues raised by one individual. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that as well. And then, so moving on to water supply conditions, there's a couple of pages at the very end of the board packet. First one starts on page 56. So on the right side for the State Water Project, the Lake Oroville Reservoir continued to remain at its full capacity, despite the hot temperatures that are in triple digits. And on April 23rd, DWR, they announced their increase in the State Water Project supply allocation from 30% to 40%. And this was due to a healthy storage level at Lake Oroville and above normal conditions in Northern Sierra. The middle of the page shows Diamond Valley Lake storage reservoir is still at a healthy level. It has 169,000 acre feet more water in this reservoir compared to last year. On the right, blue shaded area for the Upper Colorado River Basin has above normal precipitation to date, and it is at 102% of normal. The runoff into Lake Powell is forecasted at 80% of normal. And then moving on to the second page, the State Water Project in the green shaded area, the peak snowpack water content in the Northern Sierra, it peaked on April 1st at 123% of normal. The precipitation conditions are near normal at 47.2 inches or 93% of normal. The Sacramento River runoff forecast is at 99% of normal. And lastly, for the Colorado River Basin, the snowpack peaked in early April. It's at 124% of normal. Lake Mead storage is currently 9.1 million acre feet and at 35% total capacity. And Lake Powell storage has 8.42 million acre feet and is at 36% of total capacity. So this wraps up my report. I'll conclude with that for the Metropolitan Water District, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
And thank you, Tammy. Thank you for the report. Are there any questions, board members? Hearing none, we will move forward. The next item, please.
Madam Chair, that concludes our information calendar. We do not have any closed session items today, which brings us to item 8, director's comments and future agenda items.
Director's comments, please. Start with Director
comments.
Deere.
No comments from me, thank you.
All right, thank you. And Director Houston.
Just a great job by the staff, really good reports, and I think we covered some additional ground, so thank you very much.
All right, thank you. My comments, just to reiterate what Director Houston said, thank you to staff for the great reports this morning, and thank you for what you do there, and thank you to the General Manager And so with that, unless there's any other items before us, we will adjourn. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Madam Chair.